Alright everybody, and welcome back. Today I'll be starting a new series on the channel where I discuss the focus trees for each starting nation in Hearts of Iron 4, what I like, what I don't like, what we could see changed in a potential future DLC or war effort patch, and how well I think each path does and its enjoyment that I get out of it, and just anything that comes to mind when thinking about said nation. Alright, to start out with, I believe I'm going to go through the starting major powers, starting in order with France and working my way through. So the reason I decided to go with the major nations first is they kind of determine the pace of the game, depending on what they do, what factions they belong to, what paths they do is such. I believe it would be more important to get them out of the way first, then start working our way through the minor powers. And as you can probably tell, today we're going to start out with France. Now France got its focus tree rework in the La Resistance DLC back in 2020. It was actually the first DLC that I was there for day one. I had started playing the game a few months before it had come out. So I have had a lot of time with this tree, messing with it and having fun with it. It's a quite diverse tree and has a lot of different things you can do with it. So I've enjoyed playing it over the years. And to start out with, we will be going through the Air, Navy, and Army tree. Then we'll move on to the Economy tree, and finally we'll wrap up the video by discussing each of its different political paths. Alright, starting out over on the farthest right of the tree with the Air and the Navy branches, you might notice something. These kind of look like they're for a minor nation, not a major nation like France. And I would say you would be correct. While in the Navy tree there actually is quite a few very strong naval focuses, honestly the size of both trees is quite small for a major, and the reason for that is that this was back before Paradox really started doing 35-day focuses. Pretty much every single focus in the France tree is 70 days, and as France is conquered in 1939, a lot of this stuff just wasn't done because you'd split off into the Free French tree or the Vichy France tree, or you would just hold out and continue doing what you were doing. So honestly, you kind of didn't get a lot of time to do all of these focuses, so they just didn't give a lot, especially because as France, like I said, the Germans are coming on historical, so you kind of got to spec into exactly what you want to do and are only doing those focuses. So it's kind of a more on the time limit kind of run, so having wide branches that you have a lot of different options for, while would be fun, kind of doesn't work with this nation. So they got very small trees. So moving over to the air tree, we have just basically 4 focuses if you go for the fighter focus, or 5 focuses if you go for the bomber focus. And pretty much all they are is some air bases and some research models, and then an air doctrine with some air experience. And that is basically it. And these are the outdated version because By Blood alone changed how fighter models work. So I don't believe I've ever even done these focuses because they're just... Because, like I said, France just has so many 7-day focuses that you have to get through. I never look at this side of the tree for the air. Moving on to the Navy. I'm not particularly great at Navy. I have a lot of time. I'm approaching 3,000 hours, and I still don't really understand the Navy all that well. And even when I do get it to work, I don't care for it so much. I prefer just taking other people's navies and just death stacking until I can get supremacy. But honestly, the French naval tree isn't so bad because you start out with naval rearmament, which gets you 4 dockyards. If you go with the old school, you get 3 more, and if you go all the way down to developed colonial shipyards, you get another 6. Granted, these are in your colonies, but as you can see, like this one we got in Algeria, so you can get some of these in core states as well. And with the French Union, you could also core them, so you can get quite a bit of naval industry. And France already starts out with a decent navy, so you can actually get a very cool navy going if that's something you're into. It also gives you a good focus on carriers, like you can get 1936 carrier and get 40% completion on a carrier. You can get carrier plane bonuses, or you can go battleship. Young School I don't believe is as good because 5% dockyard output really isn't comparable to 3 dockyards in my opinion. But you do get good bonuses for researching these things. The problem is like I said, these are all 70-day focuses on a nation while it is a naval power, so you can make it work, you really need to prioritize other things unless you're specifically going for a naval French game, which then you would still have to hold out, because if you capitulate, you become the Free French, which they don't get their navy, or at least most of it. And they also lose access to this tree until you return to France, and then you get the tree back. But I don't think you keep... I'm not sure if you keep your focuses or not. I don't believe I've really ever played Vichy or Free France. I can usually hold out pretty well, or if it's in a dire situation, I will restart the game because I have severely messed up. So, while these are small, and while some of the focuses aren't bad, this isn't really what a major should have. They have come through with war efforts and messed with France a little bit, so I'm hopeful that after probably the next Graveyard of Empires DLC, they will come through with some more war efforts and hopefully just improve, maybe add a couple more focuses, just make this tree a little bit nicer, give you a bit more of a reason to use it. Alright, moving over to the army tree. Now, this tree is actually very cool. I actually quite enjoy the differences you have. It gives you so many different options, and it all culminates into your army reform. Speaking of army reform, we should probably talk about the national focus, the spirits that you have, because this tree has got a lot of negative ones that you're working to fix. So starting out, you got inefficient economy with minus 20 output to factories and dockyards, which is awful. As France, you really want to mitigate this as fast as you can. Moving over to political violence, this pretty much means that you can split into civil wars if you're not careful with your ideology and your amount of stability and stuff, like in flipping ideology. I'm not sure the exact ways it works, but you can remove it by getting rid of the communists or the leagues. So while it is an issue for certain runs, it's not so bad and is manageable, but it is something to be aware of. Moving over, we have full employment, which gives you minus 25% recruitable factor. While France does have a nice manpower pool, you already have a army almost of 600,000, and then on volunteer only, or no, volunteer, limited conscription, you have another 250,000. So you do have quite a large army you can muster even with this. It is still an issue because you have to man so many fronts with the two great powers of the Axis. Like, you just need large armies, and then you also have the colonial front. Like, having this limit how much manpower you can put in the field does affect you, and working hand in hand with inefficient economy. You're not getting as much equipment, and you're not getting as much manpower, so your armies are limited for the size. Moving over is protected by the Maginot Line. Now, this is actually a pretty decent spirit because it gives slower planning speed, but higher max planning. It lets you pretty much dig in better and have more, I believe it's not org, but your preparation bonus. It allows your forces to fight for getting bigger bonuses to fight or to defend, and it's while it does have a detriment of you are slower to get going, because it can get higher, it actually works out very well. Moving over to one of the worst spirits you can have, the disjointed government. Now, this one's a killer because it gives you a minus 50% surrender limit. That's why you can pretty much paradrop northern France and instantly kill France. It has a minus 10% stability, which isn't horrible but not great. And then the real killer, daily political power cost of plus 0.8. You basically make no political power. Right now, without a focus, you make 1.19, and you will lose the one when you select focus, so you'll be making 0.19 a day, which is nothing. So it really hamstrings in France's governmental change and decisions menu until you can deal with that. So that's the focus you're mainly trying to fix. But stack that with the other issues of your economy and your manpower, it really can slog you down. Moving over, we have Victors of the Great War, which gives you minus 0.3% recruitable population, minus 5% war support, and plus 50% cost to your land doctrines. Again, another hit to your manpower pool, a small hit to your war support, which you don't have a lot of, so that is an actual significant hit. And then a plus 50% land doctrine cost means that you're not getting as many land doctrines for your army, which are very important for holding out against Germany when Germany's just getting tons of XP from the Spanish Civil War and just bum rushing through their doctrine to blitz through the Benelux and then into you. So dealing with that is a big issue. And then we have the London Naval Tree. This just limits how big of ships you can make. I don't know how much this affects because, again, I'm not a Navy person, so I don't know how, like, the max carrier cost and how much these actually affect, like, meta ships or anything. So I'm not sure how bad of a spirit this actually is because I don't really deal with it. But as you can see, France is just full of dozens and dozens of terrible modifiers. So getting back to the tree, it starts out as a mini rearmament tree with the first focus giving you 4 military factories, but you need 12% war support, which, as I showed, like, you get minus from your army. Like, you have very low war support, so this actually takes a bit until the world tension goes up to get. So it does slow down when you can start this tree, but overall, I don't mind it. It's a very strong focus, and it leads into this, which comes initially to 2 decisions: your aggressive and defensive focuses. Now, I almost always go aggressive because when dealing with the AI, you don't really need to be so defensive. But the defensive focus does actually have this, which gets you cheaper artillery. Then you have cheaper infantry equipment. You have a bonus to your support equipment and heavy tanks, and then it leads into a harder tank research. So you can make the defensive focus work very well. A couple of these aren't very strong, like the support artillery for 70 days for 1 support artillery plus 5 experience really isn't that strong. I'd like them to buff this one up to maybe 10 experience and maybe 2 support artillery research bonuses, or just lower it to 35 days just so you can get through this quicker, because one of the big issues is with all of these trees, you're trying to get down to army reform to remove victors of the Great War. Plus, it also gives you land doctrine bonuses and gives funds for one of your MIOs. So getting down here is very crucial, and it just takes forever to get down here. So maybe instead of buffing some of these, you just make them shorter focuses to get down here would be nice. Moving over to the methodical battle gets you very nice land doctrine bonuses. It gets you forts, more forts, and even more forts. So this is just your turtling up France. Now, with the new rework to how forts work, I'm not sure what level of forts these actually will give. If they're higher than level 4 forts, that actually can be quite good with how now forts work. But realistically, sitting in forts, while it does work, having a more proactive stance is more fun. Moving over to the aggressive focuses, we got Battle of Maneuver, which this is pretty much your tank warfare, like your mechanized and motorized divisions. It gives you cheaper trucks. It gives you bonuses for mechanized and for tanks, specifically light tanks and medium tanks. So this is pretty much your tank France if you want to go for it. It's a good focus, but the one I prefer the most is the air dominance tree, because it gives you cheaper planes, gives you more research for planes, your doctrine cost, plus a very nice bonus to your ground support, your ground attack, and then it leads you into your army reform. This is the one I like because it pretty much this replaces your air tree, and as France, you kind of have to pick if you want air or tanks, because you do have a large industry of 52 factories, but only 8 of them are mills. You don't have a big military industry, you just have a big civilian industry with a decent naval industry. And usually the strategy is to build up infrastructure and then build up civs, then militarize in the last year to hold out the lines, because you have a strong Maginot Line. Italy doesn't join for a while, so you realistically really have, if you build up a few level 2, 3 forts here, you can hold for a long time, weaken the Germans, and then especially now that they have the economy of conquest modifiers, you can really just grind them down and go for it. So, and keeping the German cast down with your fighters, and then casting the shit out of your opponent, I just think that's the best way to play as France. Now, here in the middle, this is what was added with a war effort patch. This is why I bring up France as being touched up a bit. They added this with the infantry tanks, the special forces, and I don't even want to try to say that. Some it's French Marines, basically. Now, these are cool. This one gives you funds for a MIO. This is the really good one, which gets you special forces capacity multiplier, plus a free branch specialization. That's only I believe a few of the majors and maybe a couple of the Scandinavian trees can get all three of the forces trees, because you get one initially, you get one in I believe 1940 for like 50 political power, and then only ones that have trees that give a focus like this can get them all. So France having access to it makes it feel a lot stronger. Then you also get this bonus for transport, marines, and special forces. Besides this one I don't really care for. I'm not even sure what MIO that's for, but for 70 days for funds, I'm not enamored with. But I do like these two. These are nice little bonuses for late game France. The problem is that if you're playing France well, you don't really need to naval invade late game, because a lot of the naval invasions would be early game. I guess if you're going for a world conquest, or you're dealing with, if you want to deal with Japan yourself, it can be useful. So I like that it's an option, but it's just for a war effort patch, this being the only thing they changed, where they kind of left some of the other weaker stuff alone. I'd like them to go and mess with those a little bit more, but I'm glad that they're at least thinking about France and working towards making it better. All right, moving over to a semi-industrial and colonial development and research tree. We have the devalue the franc and all this. This starts out by giving you minus consumer goods for stability for a year. Not a bad focus. And it leads into you developing infrastructure or developing your colonies, which this one gives a lot of compliance. And if you conquer more states before doing this, you can get more compliance in conquered states, which is a cool little feature to know. Develop the metropole gives you stability, and then you can invest, which gets you building slots. You can invest in metropolitan France, Algerian France, and then your different colonies. And then the more you invest, the more civilian factors. Like if you invest in both of metropolitan France and Algerian France, I believe you get four civilian factories, and then you can get your research slot. And the more you invest over here, you get more colonial industry, and then the more you've done for these, you get more military factories, and then it leads into your 2 research slots. And then you got global integration, which gets you extra resources, which adds France with your colonial empire, and the amount of steel you have that's been moved over to your colonial empire. This is actually a pretty nice focus. Now, I have a love-hate relationship with this, because a lot of these by themselves are quite weak for 70 days, but if you stack multiple of them, they do give out a nice payoff. I almost always invest in metropolitan France and Algerian France to get the best for the industrial expansion, then move into my research slot. Problem is, there's so much to do with France, I usually have to just kind of ignore the colonial research, and which makes military factories weaker and pretty much gets you nothing for colonial industry, which isn't so bad, because they're colonial states. While you can have high compliance, it's not as important to get those factories. It depends on how much research I need. I haven't played France under the new DLC with the new special projects to see how much I want to be researching extra things. Usually you can get away with 4 research slots, because like I said earlier, France is pretty min-maxed on what you're going for, because you have to deal with Germany in 1939. So you kind of don't spread out all over the place, especially because, like I said, you start out with 8 military factories. You pretty well are going, if you're going a tank build, a motorized build, an air build, whatever you're doing, you're pretty concentrated, so there's not a lot of varied research you're doing. So you can really get away with 4 and then slowly work on this if you really want to, or just rush down and get your 5th. That's really up to you. But it's an interesting little tree. I kind of wish a lot of these were made, at least the colonial, that's the word I'm looking for. The colonial ones are made 35 day, because there is an extra one compared to these two, and it's so much time they boost into states that you don't really care for to get a benefit that, while is nice, isn't super important. With Algeria and France, you can at least core Algeria, so building them up is actually very nice. So, but that's realistically all I got on this one. I think shorten these. Maybe even shorten... Well, this one can stay as it is. For infrastructure for 70 days, I'm not sure if that should be shortened or maybe give a little bit more infrastructure. Because infrastructure is nice, but 70 days is a long time. Whereas with this one should be 35 days. 5% stability is nice, but for 70 days, and then with all these focuses you have to do, it takes forever, and France just feels very slow and has so much things to do and so many debuffs to fix that I don't think it can stay this way. I think they need to start. I would prefer to run out of good focuses to do, but have a fun game than to be slogging into 1944 still doing focuses that I should have had done 2 or 3 years before. All right, moving on to the juicy part, the political aspect of the French focus tree. Now, the France focus tree actually has a very interesting thing that I kind of like when focus trees do this, where you initially have two decisions with going with the Popular Front or the National Bloc, and they each lead into their own industrial tree with the reformed labor laws and like the laissez-faire agricultural protectionism. They both lead into the democratic trees, so you can pick to go either way and more specialize your industry on how you want to go. I usually go revive the National Bloc when I'm going for the democracy, but you can go Popular Bloc and it will change because this has a lot of factories. You can actually get rid of inefficient economy. Like, it's very good. It does give you some debuffs early on, but if you know how to play France, dealing with that isn't that hard. So I really like when focus trees do that kind of thing where you can play the same path, like confirm Eastern commitments, but you can play it in two different ways. So it doubles the amount of playthroughs for certain paths just because you can have differences. So I like that kind of thing. So I guess we'll start out on the most left and we'll work our way to the right. So starting out with the communist section. Now the communist section breaks down into realistically 3 different paths. The anti-fascist coalition, the loyalty to Moscow, and the loyalty to the cause, which each split into different ways, where to do loyalty to the cause, you have to do a civil war, whereas the other two, you can get around it by not doing a civil war. Earlier up here, you also have some industrial stuff and like political, like women's suffrage is a very strong focus. The industrial and agriculture are nice. Strengthen the unions they get you the violence. It's not very good, but you have to deal with it. Celebrate the commune, legal equity. You can honestly probably you can only go one way. You could probably just go with women's suffrage, legal equality, and then force the issue. Problem is you need a certain amount of communism, which these get you more communism, so it depends on how fast you want to force the issue or not, if you want to do these and deal with the consequences and the amount of time. Then moving down, you have reconciliation, which gets you political power and stability, versus revolution of the utmost, which gets you a war sport and a civil war. Now, the problem I see is that the communist is probably the weakest of the entire French tree, as most of them are very small and not very big differences, with the loyalty to cause being its own thing, but we'll get to that in a minute. So the anti-fascist coalition gets you a different leader, which has recruitable population and war sport, and it allows you as the communist France to join the Allies. Now, while this is kind of interesting for LARP and for getting a different leader, it's just you're realistically playing an allied France. Like, it's very similar to the regular democracy. You just had to do a bit more focuses, and it might make you a bit stronger because these focuses are quite strong, but you can still do these as a democracy. So you realistically only get a couple benefits for a longer tree to get down to here, to get into the Allies, which you already were. And the communist leaders' traits aren't good enough to justify that. You then move on to anti-fascist immigrants, which gets you weekly 1,000 manpower and research speed 5%. This is a nice focus. 1,000 manpower, plus you can also get 500 with the Karl Marx officer corps spirit. So that's very strong. But as I said, France has quite a bit of manpower and a bunch of manpower issues you can remove. So that's not as good as this would be really good in a smaller nation. But France is actually quite good. Already has quite a bit of research starting out. While it does lack like research slots initially, because it takes a while to get to these, it's going to take even longer to get down to here to get the benefit of the research speed. So while it is a good focus, it's just not super important. and then you get reconnect to the Balkans, which gets you Czechoslovakia and Romania. You can get them into your faction, which is quite added to that, which can be quite strong. The problem is that this tree exists, which completely negates that as a benefit. Then you go down to get a war goal on the fascist, which the problem is if both Germany and Italy are fascist, they're going to war with you. So getting all the way down here, this just at the bottom of a tree, this is, I don't mind them adding war goals because it helps on a history or with the AI to be able to go to war with each other. I like that. But as the only real ending focus, I don't like it. I like when they add these just in general, but these shouldn't be capstones. These should be just down there to get the AI to do certain things. Because if you want to go to war with these guys, you can. You don't need to wait till you get all the way down to here to get that. This is more of an AI focus. Moving over to loyalty to Moscow. This is where Communist France goes and joins with the Comintern. And then it goes down, you get volunteers, and then German exiles, which gets you a really nice spirit that gets you daily compliance on Germany. So if you and the Soviet Union tag team beat Germany and whatever states you annex in Germany, you can get very nice compliance gain. So that is a benefit, but the problem is that's the only good thing this path has. Because joining Moscow is, you can pretty much do that in any path, because like France seeks to join the Allies. You can join the Allies, then leave, then join the Comintern, and still get these two. So that's not a reason to do this path. Volunteer focuses should never be 70 days. They should always be 35 days. Volunteers can be powerful and nice, but going out of your way to increase your volunteer cap to send volunteers where you can only send a limited amount, like, it should never be 70 days. Now, the real highlight of this tree is host the German exiles. The problem is that you've pretty much won the game when you get this. You could, I guess, turn your back on the Soviets, then go in and conquer the Soviets after you've gained a lot of compliance in Germany. But realistically, because, as I mentioned earlier, there's no capstone down here, these kind of just don't feel like endings. They feel like they're nice, but they should be like a middle of the tree kind of thing, not the end game of a tree. Moving over to loyalty to the cause, you have where you get a different kind of leader, and then you get espionage operations, because the espionage system was new with this focus tree. Now the problem is a lot of these I don't believe worked all that well. I'm still not sure if they work now. I've not tried it because they were broken for a long time, and messing with spies is its own thing. And especially as France, like, you're gonna be invaded, so messing with all these revolutions and dealing with stuff, like, it's just like you get all these topple war goals, but which is interesting. You get all these instigate worker revolution in Italy. It's cool, and this national spirit is very nice at the end, but it's just so long to get to. You also get revolutionary zeal because you realistically are not doing this path with the Civil War because it's unnecessary, so you wouldn't be able to get this. So realistically, this is all its own thing, but I'm not sure if they even work, and even if they do, how fun that makes the game. I could be wrong, and I might give a playthrough of that, see how it works out, and we can see if my thoughts were right or wrong on that. But realistically, I just don't think the communists have any intrigue to make you want to play a communist France game. Because a lot of the time, it seems to be just democracy France, but with a different ideology. And the thing is that if you're not declaring wars, and you're just and you're having people declare on you, and you're not trying to expand and form new nations or get new cores, democracy is actually a very good ideology to be, because you get great compliance gain on colonial states, which France has a big colonial empire. Like, its benefits are accentuated with France, where France is just being attacked by everybody. So France always doesn't need to be the aggressor because people aggress upon France. So staying as a democracy really isn't an issue with France. So having a communist tree that realistically I don't think gives a end goal that's worth trying to go for just causes it to fall flat for me. Moving over to the democratic part of the tree, we'll do a little quick pit stop at this miniature right here, which is all to deal with Algeria, expanding the citizenship, and doing the French Union or encouraging immigration. This is an interesting little thing that pretty much every part of the focus tree has access to. You can core Algeria, which is very nice, especially because you can release it as a puppet, let them run through the base focus tree. Then when you do this focus, it annexes them and gives you cores on them. So that's very powerful. Expanding the citizenship gives you 3% non-core manpower, which with France having a huge colonial empire, that's very nice. Then you get over here to encourage immigration, which removes your terrible full employment modifier. Or you can choose to go over here and do French indivisible, get even more compliance and more non-core manpower, which is great. And then do the French Union, which allows you to core pretty much your entire colonial empire. Granted, it's very unlikely that you will core all of them. Usually you get maybe one or two of the areas, but the problem with this is that it causes more resistance to form in them, which can be an issue, but doing it mid to early late game, getting the cores, buffing your entry, and then finishing off the game before the resistance becomes an issue can work well. Either way, this is a very nice little tree that they have for every path. So getting into the actual democracy part of the tree, realistically, France has 3 different paths they can go. They can confirm their Eastern commitments, they can go with Britain, or they can do France leads. Let's start with the least interesting of them, which is the go with Britain, the historical focus. Besides the going with Britain to join the Allies, which I'm pretty sure you can do without doing this focus, the only thing you do is get this focus to purchase arms purchase in the U.S., which I don't think is even that good. It's quite weak. I think it's like a decent amount of political power for like 1,000 guns. It's realistically not worth doing the 70 days. So pretty much this tree on its own. And then it also has strengthened government and defensive stratagems, which give you more stability and get rid of disjointed government. The problem is this is part of all of the democracy trees, so it's not a benefit to this tree. This tree basically has nothing because you don't have to do either of the focuses, and I would recommend not doing them. So historic France really needs a bit more. Honestly, because at the start of the war, there was what was called the phony war, where France and Germany really weren't fighting. Germany was more fighting Poland at the time. So giving a little bit of content for that time period would be nice. Just giving, or maybe giving a few focuses in between after joining Britain before Germany invades. Because right now, there's nothing to do as historic France. Like, there is not a single reason to ever do this over doing any of the other paths. Moving over to a slightly better path is the France leads. This lets you create factions, give you political power, which as France you desperately want. And in this you can go to the United Kingdom, give concessions to Italy, and then ratify the Stresa-Front, which will get Italy into your faction. And then you can also get a French-Soviet treaty to get guarantees on both from the Soviet Union for both you and the Soviets, which pretty much means you're dogpiling all the major powers onto Germany when they decide to invade you. This is actually kind of fun. While it's not the most powerful, it is an interesting thing, because it at least gives you a little bit to do while you're doing democracy, and it allows you to pull in one of Germany's allies over to you, and makes you not have to deal with it. And realistically, you only got to give them I think it's just like Djibouti and maybe Tunisia, and I think Britain has to give them like French Somaliland. Like it's not a big sacrifice if it works out. So this is a small little interesting thing. It's not the most fun, but I am glad it's here. Now moving over to my favorite of the democracy trees, we have the confirm Eastern commitments. Pretty much what this is you're just reforming the little Entente. You're getting Romania, Yugoslavia. You can join the Ententes with Britain to get Britain into your faction. You can get Poland. You guarantee Poland with this focus. It's really not, it's kind of not needed because you can just guarantee them without it, but it is an option. And then the real benefit, I believe, of this focus tree is the foreign guest workers, which removes full employment. This means that you can do French Union without having to keep full employment. That's the one drawback of doing that's one of the drawbacks of doing the French Union, is that you can't get rid of your full employment. Well, this tree lets you do that. So that makes it more interesting to do the French Union in this. You also get Romania, which becomes a German ally, so getting them early, and then getting Yugoslavia also. And with strength and little entente, you get Czechoslovakia. So you're just making a very powerful faction off the bat that will stop Germany before they do the Sudetenland. I've not done this one since the last update, so I've not, with what will happen if Germany fails to take Czechoslovakia, if they still go into the Oster conspiracy or whatever. So that'll be a fun playthrough to go back through and see how that works out. But before, it's very fun because you get to, then Germany will go into a civil war. You help that German side win the civil war. It's a short game, but it's a fun game. Then you also have invest and in your weaker allies and cordial rearmament. This one's kind of worthless because licensed production aren't really important, and lowering their cost for doing 70 days, just that's not very good. And invest in our weaker neighbors. I believe it gives them a few factories, which that's kind of cool, but again, 70 days I don't really like. They did go through in the war effort patch and lower both these focuses to 35 days, which I really appreciate, because doing the 70 days to invite Yugoslavia, then 70 days to invite Romania, really slowed this tree down. So I think that has really wrapped this tree into a nice bow that makes me like it. So I'm very glad they did that. You also can support the Finns with everyone, like to make this Finns stronger against the Soviet Union. It's not super important, but it is an option. So I really do enjoy the democracy tree. I believe they did a really good job with this one. And the France leads is at least an interesting secondary option. I just really wish they would improve upon the historic. Moving over to the fascist part of the tree, we realistically have two options. You have the Latin Entente and Towards a New Europe. Now before we get into these, I'd like to talk about this little subsection. So over here you have integralism, which gets you a very nice political advisor with political power gain and stability, plus some political power for 35 days. This is a very powerful focus. You also have political unity, which gets you rid of disjointed government very early. Once you just need to have over 50% of unaligned fascists, which, while not the easiest with using the leagues and such, because they can really damage your stability, this can get you that advisor that fixes that, so you can actually rush down to do it. So it's actually very nice. You have destroyed decadence, which gets rid of your democracy support. It's not really an important focus to do, but it is an option if you want to try to secure your political ideology a bit more. Then it moves into a little section I like a lot, which is where you can decide if you want to get work, family, or fatherland, which means you can get war support, stability, or protection, efficiency, growth. Now, I like when they have these kind of things where like you can pick which one you want. It's a nice little flavor where technically you can do 3 different playthroughs and they will be slightly different. It's not a big difference, but it can affect it, like giving the efficiency growth versus getting extra war support to flip up to like war economy. It gives a little thought and intrigue into the trees. So moving over, we'll start with the Latin Entente. So pretty much the Latin Entente gives you a retired officer leader, which makes your army, like high command, cheaper to get. It also lets you create a faction, which you can reach out to Spain and invite Portugal. These, I believe, were 70 days that have also been reduced to 35 days, which I'm very glad. I think pretty much any invitation a lot of invitations, unless they're very powerful members, like major powers or game changer options, should be 30 days, because it's not fun to have to just slog through these focuses to get Portugal and Spain. But 35 days, I think, is acceptable. Moving over, you can compensate Italy, which they become owner of Somaliland, and then if they accept that, they join your faction, and then you guys both join and invade Greece, where Italy gets pretty much the entire mainland, where you get Crete and the Aegean island. Depending on how it goes, you can possibly get more, but realistically, with the claims, that's probably how it's going to split apart, which is cool. Then you go into the Congress of Paris. I don't remember exactly what this event does, but I think it just decides like expansion and all things that are going to be how that goes. Like, I think it might give different, like Spain might get some of your territory. I'm not sure how this one went. It's been a long time since I've done this one. Then it moves down into the natural borders of France, which gives you pretty much claims up on Belgium and not the Netherlands, Belgium and Luxembourg. It gives you an annex war goal against both. Then it also gives you a conquer war goal against the Netherlands and the Germans, which at the end of the tree is quite nice. It's not the biggest deal because you're a fascist nation, you can invade them, but I do like it. And then joined together with both fascist trees is to expand to the Suez and dominate the Middle East, which gives you a war goal in the United Kingdom and pretty much claims on a lot of the Middle Eastern territory on the right side of Egypt. So pretty much expanding your Syrian holdings down to the Suez. And then this lets you demand the subjugation of pretty much all the independent Middle Eastern nations. Now this might change because Oman and Iraq might become part of the British Empire, so this might become weaker. But for right now, it's a very nice focus because you can get 4 puppets in the region for free for just doing this focus. It's very nice. I quite enjoy this. The one thing I would think would make this better is if you could get a core on Belgium and Luxembourg, even if it costs 100 political power to integrate Northern Territory, however you want to do it. That would be nice because the problem with France is unless you do European Union or unite the crowns over here, which we'll get to, you can't really get more cores, which it's not the biggest of deals, but it is something that kind of bothers me. I forgot to talk about it with the democracy path, but maybe making it where the France can have an easier time forming the European Union. I know a lot of other trees already have it, but just giving France the option to at least propose it would be nice. It doesn't have to be a central part, but just food for thought. Moving over to the Towards New Europe, this is pretty much where you're out. In this tree, you fight the Germans still because Germany will still come in on you. And you're pretty much building a power block in the Mediterranean to fight them back. In this one, you side with the Germans. You get a much worse leader, but as a result, you split up the Benelux regions. You join the Axis and you split up the Benelux region. Germany gets a claim on the Netherlands and on Luxembourg, whereas you get the Belgium claims. And then you can split Belgium, where you can demand of Wallonia, or you can demand them as become a puppet state. I believe this one does. I believe this one also makes them a puppet state, but you get half of them. Then you can grow the empire, which allows you to absorb the Belgian Congo, which up until recently was broken. You'd only because they added more states in by blood alone, so it wasn't. So it actually kind of didn't work as well as it used to. Now it's been fixed. Also, as a result of the Belgian Congo being an independent country, not independent, but being a starting nation with a focus tree. These lands are actually a lot more valuable than they used to be because now they can get more resources and more factories. So this focus has been buffed massively just by that happening. Same with Belgium having a focus tree. They can actually become stronger. So incorporating them into your nation actually is quite a bit stronger. And then you get the focus Bring Home Quebec, which gets you claims on the Quebec territory. Now, this is kind of a redundant focus because Expand to the Suez gives you a United Kingdom war goal. But if the United Kingdom had gone monarchist or fascist and the Dominions have broke away, it does give you an easy way to get a war goal on them instead of having to justify. But it's kind of just there. I like that it's there. I think this one should probably be 35-day focus just because of how useless it is in comparison. But it's not the biggest deal. You can just ignore it if you don't need it. Or if you do, you use it. So, and then you get to keep the Expand the Suez and the Dominate the Middle East. So overall, they're very nice paths. I just don't seem to do them all that often because the elephant in the room, which we'll get to in a minute, is over here. But overall, I do like them. I think buffing them to be able to get this focus to let you get cores, and maybe this if you split Belgium, you get cores on Wallonia, and then the other part becomes a puppet state. A little bit of tweaks would be nice. But overall, I think this tree is very strong and built fairly well that it can stay the way it is until France gets a rework down the line. France really isn't a nation that needs the biggest rework at the moment. I think it's in the touch-up stage where you just touch up some stuff. It could get, touching up its historic path is, the most important thing. But I think most everything else is in a decent state. The communist tree kind of needs a whole rework, but we kind of can just ignore that because that's not happening until it gets a full rework, most likely. But everything else, I think, is relatively cool. Alright, and moving over to the final part of the focus tree, and my favorite part, we have the Monarchist branch, which has 3 different sections: the Orleanist Restoration, the Legitimate Heir, and Proclaim the Third Empire. So to start this focus tree, it gains you your non-aligned support, then you revise the Constitution, which gets you weekly stability for a year, and you have to wait until that full year before you can repeal the Law of Exiles, which gets rid of your disjointed government. So it is slightly slower than National Regeneration, because you need the 50% of fascist and non-aligned, and then you can go into political unity. So it is slightly slower than this tree on the right, but it does give you some great options. So we'll start with the worst, which is the Orleanist Restoration, which allows you to, this is basically the stability path. Now, this one was slightly tweaked with a war effort where clear the slums and counteraction were reduced to 35 days, but realistically that does not fix the biggest issue with this path. So what you do with this path is you put the Duke of Orleans, Jean III, on the throne. He dies, I believe, and then he's replaced eventually, but I've not played this tree long enough to see that happen. I don't know if I've ever actually even done the tree completely. But pretty much what you do with this one is you put him in charge, and he gives daily unaligned support, so it builds up your party popularity, which can increase your stability. Then you can guarantee the Constitution, which gets you more stability. You do first citizen of the state, which gets you 0.10 political power and weekly stability of 1%. Very good focus, but the problem is then you go into counteraction, which removes daily fascism. That's not very important. That does the same thing as increasing your unaligned. Now this is reducing your fascism. So you're pretty much centralizing control to the non-aligned party. Clear the slums gives you 3 building slots in Ile-de-France, which I believe that's what that's Paris's state. Yeah, that's Paris's state, which will be very built up. So giving 3 extra building slots isn't terrible, but it's not too great. No further humiliation gives you a faction and a war goal on Germany and Italy. On historic, they'll still invade you, but getting the rule can create factions can be used for some shenanigans. So, and then the war goes. It's not the worst focus, but it's not a highlight. It's good to have. It's just this doesn't fix the problem. Then you move down to public welfare, which gives you more stability. You can see a theme in this tree. It's all about stability. You'll be really stable as this tree, but that's about it. There's realistically nothing you can do. You're pretty much playing a democracy, but you're not aligned. So you have a bit better rules with like flipping your economy laws and your conscription laws, but that's about it. Like, there's nothing really interesting that it can do. The thought I had is to allow a game rule change where you can actually form the European Union as the Orleanist, because he's a constitutional monarch. That means that he's basically how the British monarchs are, and how like most constitution, like he is not in charge. He's just the king, but they still have I don't know what France would have, a parliament or whatever. So it's basically a democracy with extra steps, and it really plays that way and has nothing to do. So giving it access to the European Union, which has been expanded upon in the last DLC, would be great, because one of the issues with democracy is you can't justify on other democracies because you can't justify on the same ideology group and on nations that have not created world tension. So doing this, you can at over 50%, at least of 50% world tension, justify. So you can incorporate other nations. So giving them the option to form the European Union would at least give it its own little identity, because then it would be different. Because you can already do it where you go down this tree, you don't flip, you stay democracy, you don't join the Allies, you wait for Germany to blow through the Benelux, you hold out, and then you conquer Germany and Italy, you get the Italian puppet, you annex all of Germany's starting states, annex Italy, and then form the European Union. Then you do one of these 3 focuses, because then you flip non-aligned, and now you're non-aligned, but you're also the European Union. That's something they could do where like they just allow this path to do it regardless. Because then you get rid of your disjointed government, then you just sit here, don't pick another political focus, wait until you finish the war, do that, then you can do down here. So giving that to this tree, I think would at least give it some incentive to do. It still probably won't be a great tree, but just giving where one of these, where this would also give you that decision available, would at least give you a reason to play it. I'd at least give it a try. Moving over to the legitimate heir. Now, when this DLC first came out, I actually did not like this path because I did not understand it and it was so short. I didn't care for it. But over the years, as people like Hatless Spider and other YouTubers have created guides on how to get the car list to rise up and then how to do all of it, I've actually very much come to love this path because this sneaky little focus allows you to intervene in Spain and actually go to war with them. And then you can occupy one of the northern states, which causes the fascists not to be able to fuse the parties. And as a result, the Carlists rise up. And doing some finagling, you can get the Carlists to become in power. And then you can secure the crown and unite the crowns and core Spain. And because of how it works, they can core Portugal, and Portugal can core Brazil. So you can, as Hatless Spider showed, do 4 kings, 1 king, 4 crowns, which I've not done. I have done the 2 crowns. I believe I've done 3 crowns before. I have done where you can core Portugal as well. Now that's not as important because, as I stated earlier, you can form the European Union, then do this, which kind of makes the interesting part of this tree go away because now you have a decision to core Spain if you control Spain, but it is an easy way to do it. And it's cool for the monarchist and the flavor. It was very good now. It was very good up until the last DLC. It might not be as good as it used to be just because of the rework to the European Union, but that's all right. It'll still hold a place in my heart for what it's done over the years. And then we move over to the Napoleon path. Now, the Napoleon path is very fun because it allows you to form your faction, go to avenge Waterloo, go against the Benelux and the UK really early, and then you can get a war goal on Germany, which, while isn't super important because Germany will come in on you, and by the time you beat Britain and stuff, it's probably pretty close, but it's still there. You can reorganize the Dutch, which gets you good compliance gain on the Netherlands. You get a war goal in the Soviet Union. You can disunite Germany, which isn't as cool as it used to be, as it was the only way to balkanize Germany before. Now you can do it with a preset. It's still cool. It's just, and now they have individual, like it's still a thing. And since it's off to the side, it's not a big deal. And then you get this nice spirit, Les Deluge, which gets you good population factor, good recruitable factor. It's a strong tree, but honestly, I think the biggest problem with it is that while you can conquer all these, you can't incorporate any of them. Like if you can incorporate Luxembourg and Belgium and then get the good compliance gain on the Dutch, that would be something. Or maybe make it like, because back during the Napoleonic era, there was what was called sister republics, which the Dutch was one of them, I believe, where they were pretty much puppet states, but they, like, Poland was one. Like, having some kind of puppet mechanic that, like, they've added with, like, they've added new puppet mechanics with the last DLC. Doing something like that with this path, I think, would be great. It would give it a bit more flair, because right now it's just fight all the majors, and then have Napoleon the Sixth. It's cool. I like it. And again, with the now that you can the way you can cheese the European Union, doing this actually is probably stronger than the legitimate era is now, just because you can go in on the Soviet Union to get even more cores and all that. So like, it, I believe, has gotten stronger as a result of that. But I think just giving it something specific for it to do besides just war goals would be nice. All right, and that wraps up all I have to talk about today. Next time, we'll be talking about the United States of America and everything I have to think about them. For all of you who've made it to the end of this long-winded video, I'm sorry, I didn't realize it would take me this long to go through everything. I guess a lot of these are going to be very long. But if you could like, comment, and subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. And I'll see you guys in the next one.